Okay, we've got a quorum, I believe, so we can go ahead and proceed. Thank you for joining, Murray. Okay, again, welcome to our Medical Marijuana Testing Advisory Council meeting, our November meeting. I'll just go over a few things quickly before we get started with our agenda. Again, this is open meeting law reminder. You may only discuss topics that are on the agenda and can request to have items added to the next meeting agenda. Please do not make comments in the chat. Please use the raise your hand functionality to participate in the discussion. And once a motion is made and seconded, we will vote on that motion before entertaining another motion. Again, just a reminder of the council's charge. The Medical Marijuana Testing Advisory Council shall annually review the marijuana testing program and submit a report by the second Monday in February. And this report should include recommending analysis to be removed from the required statutory testing panel. It should also include de-identified information about testing related deficiencies cited against licensed marijuana facilities. And it should also have any other recommendations on improving the testing program. Just things to keep in mind, while the next report will not be finalized until January, ADHS will consider the Medical Marijuana Testing Advisory Council recommendations made now as we continue with the regular rulemaking currently taking place for the medical marijuana rules in Chapter 17. Okay, and as we've got our quorum, we're going to proceed and we're going to move forward. And I believe first up is Megan with a review of motions passed in the September MMTAC meeting. Megan.
Thank you very much, Victor. So we did have some confusion at our last meeting, which we apologize for. So we just want to clarify which motions did pass based on the 11 voting members that were present. The first motion was that the advisory council recommends removing propane and acequinacil from the required testing panel for medical marijuana in the rules. That motion was made by Tabitha, seconded by Steve Cottrell, and all 11 members were in favor of that motion, so it did pass. The second recommendation was to amend the definition of batch in the rules to include the following language. When referring to cultivated medical marijuana, a specific amount of a particular lot of medical marijuana that is uniform in strain, grown from one or more seeds or cuttings that are planted, cultivated, utilizing the same pesticides and other agricultural chemicals and harvested at the same time. That motion had been made by Murray Stein. It was seconded by Ryan Hurley. 8 members voted in favor, 3 were opposed. So that motion also passed at the September meeting. The advisory council, this is the third recommendation. The advisory council recommends adding the following definition of form to the rules. The matrix of marijuana classified into categories of marijuana concentrate, edible, and topicals. Murray Stein had made that motion. It was seconded by Steve Cottrell. 7 members were in favor, 4 abstained, so that did pass. And then we had 1 failed motion in the September meeting. It was that the advisory council recommends that the current rules not be changed to add a size limit to the definition of batch. That motion had been made by Ryan Hurley. It was seconded by Matt Lascala. 5 members voted in favor, 3 members opposed, and 3 abstained, so that motion did fail. As far as today's meeting, both Murray Stein and Tabitha have presentations to share with us, and we're going to try very hard to get through all of those presentations as quickly as we possibly can, because it's very important that any recommendations that we're going to include in that January report, we really need to have voted on today, with the intention being that we'll have another meeting in early December where we can finalize that report before the holidays are in full swing. So with that said, Murray and Tabitha also had sent proposed motions to go along with their presentation. So we have that language for you as well. So as they're going through their presentations, we will double check with them to see if they would like to actually make those recommendations formally during this meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you, Megan. Okay, we'll move over to you, Murray, if you're ready for your discussion on topical definition and alignment of testing rules.
I am.
Okay, perfect.
So are you guys going to be presenting then the content that was provided previously as you have before?
Yes, you should see it now on the screen.
Okay, just
Can you read-
waiting.
Can others see the slides that we're presenting on the screen?
Yep, nice and clear.
Perfect.
I'm not. What's the story, Brad? Stand by. That's not it. That's folks in Phoenix. Okay, well, I'm not sure why I'm not seeing it, but that's okay. I have a hard copy in front of me and I'll try to keep this short. So first of all, thank you everybody for participation. You know, I like a number of you take this role pretty seriously. I think we all are in a position where we want to improve where we can add value to what the state's trying to do in terms of governing the safety of the customers we serve. And so every time we have one of these meetings, I get really excited about it. And it's not just because Steve Cottrell is going to be there or Steve Baker, my two Steves, but it's just because I think this is great that we can try to move our industry in the right direction and address pain points as we see them, because we're all pretty close to this industry. So last time we spoke, I talked a bit about topicals and the importance of trying to get clarity in terms of how we look at those. One of the key responsibilities we have, and by the way, I'm on slide 2 if you're not there, is the proposed definition of topical. And I'm going to come back to this at the end with a motion. But the challenge we have is if you look at how language is referred to with regard to the application of products to the epidermal layer, these are not physically ingested. By and large, they do not create any sort of psychotropic effect. Most states set, where they do choose to set relatively high limits for the milligrammage in those products for good reason. So the difficulty is that we see the industry applying or being confused about the topical rules across both medical and adult use. And since our key goal is to see alignment of the testing, again, it's for safety, and whether you're a medical patient or otherwise, that's something you're entitled to. And by trying to get closure and consistency with the definitions, it solves a lot of problems for the labs. It solves a lot of problems in terms of customers trying to understand what products they can and can't have. So it's really for us all about the alignment. So we're going to be introducing a proposed definition for topical. We'll ask to vote on that later at the end of this. But currently, marijuana topical or topical really does refer to a product containing both the cannabis plant and potentially other compounds in it, minor cannabinoids, flavonoids. There's hundreds and hundreds of compounds in the plant. And we ourselves work in a particular mode of how we do our infusion, where getting to those other compounds is rather important. The only real reference, that we have is to topicals and edibles topicals and ointments is rather confusing, which I'll explain in the next slide. We're now on slide 3. So currently we've defined batch. We've got the reference to batch says marijuana products, and specifically when referring to marijuana products, a specific amount of product infused, manufactured, and so forth. And then the adult use side, we also define marijuana products, but we make reference to the term ointments. Now, this is part of the statute, I may have said rules, statute, where ointment term is brought out, but ointment is a very specific type of topical. And it's therefore, if you use that as the application across the board, you're limiting the many types of products that you could apply as transdermally or dermally. So this is where the confusion comes from. And then if you look further into it, you'll discover that R1917 has or should have specific requirements to support this classification. So we're suggesting that topicals really be more clearly defined to address this confusion, and by identifying the fact that it can be a variety of different products. So if you now look at page 4, the adult use statute, which contains the reference to ointments as I referred to earlier, and that's great. Then you go down to the individual medical versus adult rules. Again, for looking for consistency for all the points we understand, and we have references within batch to that. But then it breaks down when you get into R917 versus R918. They both make recommendations in table 3.1. They both point out details in table 0.1. And we think that we should be using the terminology from 3.1 to more accurately define topicals within the definition section of the rules. And ointments would be called out as a specific kind of topical. This is the only way we know, given the nature of statutes and their impermeability, to address this inconsistency in the rules as it refers to topicals. So on to slide 5. Again, trying to align adult use and medical marijuana testing requirements. You know, you guys are doing that. The labs are coming back with great information that's going to streamline things, possibly reduce cost. We can always hope. But when you look at the micro requirements, the heavy metals testing and the potential changes of rules there, it really is critical that we encourage the folks doing the adult rules rulemaking to follow the guidance here so that we can maintain consistency across both of them. So for example, medical rules may require only heavy metal testing every 6 months. If that change isn't made to or encouraged to be made on the adult use side, we're going to end up with inconsistency. So we have to pay attention to that. So again, I think it's appropriate that we adopt the same rules for medical and adult use. I don't know that this is the right place to do that, but it's certainly a recommendation we would make if it's not more clearly defined elsewhere. And then lastly, there's an example on the bottom of this page where I say there's one reference to topicals, that's 3.1, and that edible and topical products, which are very different, should be identified as unique and separate subcategories, specifically of marijuana products. And moving on to the next table, which is the 3.1 reference I had with regard to topicals, this is the reference to topicals. This is it. And 3.1 is referred to in both adult use and medical rules. So, you know, since they're distinguishable here in table 3.1, we need to ensure the application across both the markets of medical and adult use. And that can be done with the clear definition of topicals. Last slide is slide 7. And this is really a visual definition of what we're proposing. We're not arguing that the state adopt this table, but at one point early on in the testing world, a table like this did float around as a sort of an educational or informative piece. But it really should be expanded to more clearly indicate the distinction between these products, because we want to apply the right rules to everything. So based on all of that, I'd like to go back to slide 2 and make the motion that we adopt the definition of topical as defined here, that a topical means any product containing parts of the cannabis plant that is intended for application to the body's surface, including but not limited to lotions, ointments, salves, gels, or cream that are not intended for ingestion, inhalation, or insertion by humans or animals. I'd like to make that formal motion that we adopt that definition.
And Murray, I see that Ryan Hurley has his hand raised. He may have a question. Ryan?
Yeah, thank you. I'm not really sure it matters specifically for the motion, but on the last slide, the proposed testing guidance table, I'm just curious if we have edible and concentrates that are inhalable. What is a concentrate that is non-inhalable?
A concentrate that be non-inhalable almost follows into the category of like a concentrated tincture. It could be RSO oil, that sort of thing.
Okay, I guess I would throw that under edible if it's intended for oral consumption, but
Well, would
as long as, yeah. Sorry, go ahead. No.
would
Yep.
a suppository fall under that category as well?
Quite possibly.
okay, there you go. Thanks, Steve. That's the only question I had. I'm happy to second Murray's motion.
Ryan Hurley seconded that motion, and then I think we had a couple more council members join us during the presentation.
Hello, this is Max. I have a question about the guidance table. Can we get back to it? I just want to, have a quick question to clarify.
You want to go back? Can we go
Yeah,
back,
the
Marion?
proposed testing guidance table.
So that is not part of his, just to clarify, that is
I'm so
not
sorry.
part of
Yeah,
his- That's
okay.
okay.
Then it's fine then. Yeah, thank you.
The actual recommendation that Murray proposed, the language is the very top one on your screen right now. And Ryan Hurley has seconded it. Are there any more?
Are there any more questions before we take a vote? Okay, we'll take a vote then. How did we do it last time? All
Roll
those?
call.
Okay. Okay, so we'll go through everyone and get your vote. You have the option to agree, disagree, or abstain. And we'll start with Steve Cottrell. If you could unmute Steve and give us your vote, please.
Sorry about that. I approve.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Matt LaScala.
I approve.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Andrew Provencio. Andrew,
I approve.
thank you. Next, we'll go to Tabitha.
I approve.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Joe DeMena.
I vote yes.
Thank you, Joe. And next, we'll go to Vince.
I approve.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Zhonghua Zhang.
I'll approve.
Thank you. Next, we'll go to Maxwell Lung.
Approve.
Thank you. We'll go to Alvin Altamarino,
I approve.
and I think that's everyone.
This is
So,
Steve
okay,
Baker.
Yeah, I didn't actually vote, but I vote yay.
Since you made the motion, we
You
accepted
assume?
yours.
Okay.
Yes.
This
Perfect.
is Steve Baker. I think, just for the record, Steve Cottrell seconded, not Ryan Hurley. Is that correct?
No, Ryan Hurley seconded it. I just
Okay.
approved.
That's
I-
right.
Okay.
I thought it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. We've got everything we need, so motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Okay, so next we are going to move on to batch definition and sampling procedures, and Tabitha is going to lead this. Tabitha?
Yes, hi. Okay, we've already went over the batch definition in the very first meeting that we had. So this was kind of a second part that kind of goes hand in hand with my third part that I have. So the second part of my presentation was some sampling requirements. And I have, oh, you do have the slides up there. So it starts with, I don't know what page it is, but it says sampling requirements. It's a few pages back if you want to get to that on the screen, the PDF. And we've already went through all of that. Nope, one more. Nope, one more. There we go.
This is,
Okay,
okay,
yes, that's it. So in addition with recommending a defined batch, this report is also recommending that a sampling process is adopted and strongly suggests that it be evaluated to ensure samples are what they are stated and are representative of each batch. So currently, a lot of states have requirements that require either a third party company to do the sampling or labs. And basically among the procedures of the states, most require a certain number of aliquots to be taken and then combined depending on the batch size. I'm hoping that we suggest that the sample requirements are set by ADHS licensing body. This is just a couple of recommendations and some examples of what current states are doing. Basically, there needs to be clear sampling protocols that needs to be established and adopted to ensure consumer safety among a batch. The only way to ensure the sample being submitted without bias is to have a third party or the labs do it. In the subsequent slides I have, I gave an example of what Washington does for flour, and then on the next slide, Colorado does for concentrates, and then I used what California is using for marijuana products. So if we go to the next slide, this is just a an example of what Washington, I'm not going to go through every word for word for this, but basically it's depending on how many pounds that is defined in the batch, then a certain amount of aliquots is taken and then combined to create one single test. So basically, if we said that the final batch weight is 50 pounds, then 19 1-gram increments would be combined to create a 19-gram test sample. On the next slide, we go into the concentrated sampling protocols for Colorado. It's basically the same thing, depending on how big pounds the concentrate you make, the more aliquots that have to be taken combined to make one sample to be tested. So an example of this is if your final product weight is 50 pounds as defined by the batch, then you would need 43 250 milligram increments would be combined to create one 10.75 gram test sample. And again, this is just Colorado's example. On the next slide, basically this is California's protocol for actual products being made, let's just say pre-rolls in general, and it's really defined by units, not gram size. So depending on how many units you made in this batch size, which there's a table there, then that's, and the next column is how many, the number of sample increments that need to be combined to create one test product. So an example would be if the final production batch has 10,000 units, then 20 sample increments would be combined to create one test sample. And that's pretty much it. I mean, most states do have some kind of sampling procedure and requirements for this to be done, except for we don't have anything really laid out in stone to ensure that we are getting a good representation of the batch, the batch that's being actually tested. So that's pretty much what I'm proposing for this part of it. So we can open it up for questions or anything.
This is Murray Stein. Could I ask a question, Tabitha?
Sure.
I'm sorry, for whatever reason, my interface does not show the raise your hand, so forgive me for interrupting. As I understand it, Tabitha, we use or have been encouraged to use the ANSI standard table special level 2 or something like for our sampling requirements. Is there, to apply what you are recommending, wouldn't it make sense to use the same ANSI tables, but say use special level 1 and then use the counts recommended in terms of the number of samples taken per batch size?
I'm sorry, I muted you or muted myself. Are you talking about the units? The
Yes.
example for, you know, I'm really unsure of that, the answer to that question. I'm really just proposing this to get everybody's feedback on it, just to have a more clear process for what we're doing here as far as making sure that it's a good representation of our samples that are being submitted. It's really up in the air on how we decide to do it. We really just need a more defined way of doing it to make sure that we are getting the product that we're supposed to be getting. And another big point of this is the labs don't know, and neither does the state know, if the sample is actually being subsampled or combined properly before it gets to the lab. This is really about having a third party do the sampling or have the laboratories come in and do it so they can make sure they're actually getting a good representation of the batch being submitted.
Okay, let's go to Ryan next.
Thank you very much, and Tabitha, thanks for putting this together. I certainly, when we're talking about making sure that the samples are representative and that the consumer is getting what they bargained for, I think this is the right area of inquiry to be focusing our attention on, rather than specific batch size, as I discussed before. I would be supportive of maybe sort of a general guidance to DHS to sort of examine and reconsider sampling procedures in a future rulemaking. You know, I am not, at this time anyway, not supportive of having labs pull the samples for a number of different reasons, not the least of which is I don't think any of them are in any way prepared to be able to do that. And I'm not sure that they're the best people to be able to do that. So I would be supportive of examining the sampling standards to see if the ANSI standards are adequate or if they need further description or further refinement. And that's where I would come down on this issue. Thank you.
Well, like this presentation suggests, I really would just putting this out there and would like the licensing agency, the state, to come up with the requirements, and whatever the requirements may be, a lab would be sufficient to follow the rules that the state puts down as far as how to actually get a representative sample, and also the option of a third party. There are third party agencies out there that come and do things like this or have been created in other states. The laboratories, we have 25 licensed labs right now. I don't see that as being an issue as far as if that's the state rule that we would have to do it, or a dispensary or cultivation had the option to choose between a lab or a third party besides the lab. That would be fine too. But I think the labs would probably, with the amount of labs, we are not bottleneck in any means to be able to not be able to do this if it was a state requirement.
This is Megan with the state. Just to clarify, the advisory council can absolutely make recommendations to the department and any testing related recommendations that they would like to have included in the report. Just we have to always consider as we move forward and consider those recommendations and how to enact them, that we have to stay within our statutory authority. So I just want to put that out there because it's very clear in the statute what the department has authority to license as far as marijuana facilities go. And we wouldn't be able to create kind of a new license type without statutory authority.
Okay, we'll go to Joe DeMena. You have a question?
Yes, thank you. And Megan, that was super helpful because that was kind of where I was headed with this. You know, I tend to agree that you know, the dispensaries and the labs are not necessarily the best fit to have, you know, getting the samples if we want to make sure that there's true transparency. But at the same time, my concern as the patient rep is the idea that, you know, having another vendor or third party entity coming in will certainly, you know, raise costs, and that will likely be passed down to the consumer. So I guess my main question was, Tabitha and others on the board, what would be an ideal third party entity, and what do other states do in this realm that we could potentially mirror?
In Las Vegas, they have their own entities, their own sample picking entities throughout Nevada.
Yeah, and that's where this research came from, as far as there are third party, you know, just like when regulation hit with the rules for having to test medical marijuana, we had all of these labs come in and set up to be ready for it and to be able to accommodate our current industry right now. And it would be the same thing, or other places that do it for other plant or other type of organizations could adapt to do what the state rules would say to do it for medical marijuana too. There's other places that can actually learn the same process and do what they're doing now. They probably have places here that are open that do those things. I didn't research them, but I'm pretty positive there are sample pickers, I guess you would say.
Thank you.
Steve Cottrell, I believe you had a question.
Joe had addressed my question regarding the costs being increased. The other question that I did have, if we could put up Tabitha's diagram back there at the very beginning that she had before this, where it showed how many samples were to be chosen per weight or batch size. It wasn't really batch, I think it was weight.
There was one on flour,
Okay.
Steve, concentrates, or
Yeah, there we go, right
medical
there.
marijuana products.
If I could just interject here, this is Murray Stein again. Again, I apologize. I don't have a raising hand on my screen, and I'm sure I'm going to get grief about that from you guys later. But I'm going to again refer back to the special level 2, is it Brandon, or 1? Special level 1. Honestly, when we look at that and look at the qualification under that ANSI table, you can almost clearly achieve the same kinds of numbers that you're looking in terms of numbers of samples. I'm going to suggest that we put together a couple slides on that for the next meeting, probably share it with Tabitha as well to make sure we understand the pain points from her standpoint. But just in terms of the right number of samples for the amount of material or amount of units being made, I really strongly suspect that we've already got it covered with the ANSI table. We just need to use the sample size that's suggested there and fall under the special level 2, I think, or special level 1, excuse me. But I'll defer that till the next meeting if you guys want to. That doesn't speak to a third party or anybody independently coming in for those samples.
Okay, thank you. I'll go back to Steve. Did you get your question answered, Steve?
Yeah,
Cottrell?
as I look at this Colorado Department of Public Health's sampling protocol here, it does seem a little bit heavy for what we would be asking the state to do. I think it's incredibly burdensome with 5 samples for a pound. I think we need to, looking at this, there's I would not suggest we use this, but there is, looking at some other version of this might be acceptable.
Again,
Okay.
this presentation is more about accountability to making sure the representative sample is being, what the state rules have currently or differently. And these are just examples as far as sampling requirements. But again, it's really about making sure that the sample is what it is when it comes in the door to the laboratory, because right now there's no accountability or proof being made that this is truly a representative sample of the batch.
Okay, we'll go to Zhonghua Shang.
Thank you. I have one comment and then one question. I think I strongly support the proposal having independent or third party or someone who can make sure that samples are truly representative for the test. And then the question is, since Las Vegas is doing it, so how much extra cost has been passed down to customers?
I wouldn't specifically know the answer to that, honestly. I mean, but with the more streamlining and the better labs become and you get more staff, and now that we're up and going, I'm sure the cost would be minimal. I mean, this cost, what it did cost us to get up and running and test in the beginning was a lot more than it is now, since we've gotten everything done and are streamlined everything. So I can't imagine it being all that much additional cost. But I really don't know the clear answer to that.
Yeah, I think if it's the minimum burden to the customers, it would be a great idea. I strongly support it.
Okay, we'll go to Ryan Hurley next.
Thank you. So, I agree with Steve that some of these specific requirements on these slides would be overly burdensome and unnecessary. And I would also really was going to say this before Murray said it anyways, but I'd like to echo what Murray said, is that I think it would be useful for us to have a couple of slides and a presentation from somebody who has in-depth knowledge on the ANSI standards that are referenced in the rules right now. And Murray, it sounds like perhaps you have somebody on your staff there that is well versed in that. And that would be useful to see that alongside some of these other requirements and kind of see where we stand already and where we might have to go. So I would be supportive of tabling this conversation until we can get some of that more information and that more in-depth slides. And I am volunteering Murray or somebody on his team if he has that capacity to be able to do that.
Now, how could I deny a call from Ryan Hurley?
So, and just to remind everyone, so we really need to focus on the recommendations that are going to go in this January report today, so that we have that all prepped and ready to go. But absolutely, we are going to continue meeting into next year, and we're going to continue to do these annual reports. And also our team, just to let you guys know, as we did TA sessions last year on some of the topics that had been brought up in the advisory council. This is one, because it has come up so often in the advisory council, that our team is actually working on some TA sessions for, that we're hoping to roll out after the new year as well, is on some sampling and protocols based on the current standard that's in our rules, just to let everyone know.
Okay, and we'll go to Maxwell. I believe you had a question.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. I
Okay.
just want to know more about how the picker system is going to work. So if there's a patient who want to have it cannabis tested, like can he or she call the lab to have someone to come pick the cannabis up from him and then have it tested? Because I know in California, this is what they can do. You can just call a lab and then they can have someone to pick it up. I wonder, like how would that work? If we implement this in Arizona. Thank you.
Well, basically, a third-party company would, when there's samples to be harvested and be taken to the lab. I mean, because the labs pick up right now. Picking up is different thing. Having someone actually go in and do the sampling part of it and combining a sample for one single unit test. So I would just imagine you would call the third-party company and tell them what you have, and they'll come in and following whatever the state rules has in place now. Or again, these are just examples. I'm not giving, I'm not saying we need to adopt anything. I'm just showing what other states are doing. But really, again, it's just about accountability and making sure that that product is getting sampled correctly. I really can't see a reason why it's kind of feels like it's really being opposed right now. I mean, it's for safety reasons. It's making sure there's, it's transparent that it is the sample, especially when you have a third party doing it. And I really think the cost would not be all that much, but it would just ensure to everybody that the sample is the sample that's being received to the lab.
Oh no, I'm just asking if the patient can use it. That's all. Yeah.
Well,
thank you.
I would any patient could even drop off a sample to the lab to be tested if they want to. A patient would be, I would guess, I'm really unsure that a patient could request to go into cultivation and hire someone to pick their samples. You know what I mean? It all has to be tested before it hits the dispensary. But a patient can definitely take, a sample to the lab and have it tested, regardless if they have a card or not. They can still get it tested.
Max, just for clarity, so what Tabitha's proposing here would be before any dispensary or establishment sells marijuana or dispenses marijuana, they have to ensure that all that required testing is done. So Tabitha's proposal is specifically about that, having a third party company that would come do the sampling and submit that sample to one of the labs for testing. But patients absolutely and consumers do take the marijuana that they purchase from the dispensaries and establishments to the labs and have it tested. But that wouldn't really fall into what she's proposing here, I don't believe.
Oh, okay, I understand. Thank you.
I don't think we have any more comments, but do we want to show the original recommendation that Tabitha had submitted to see if she would like to actually make a recommendation formally today, or if anyone else would like to make a formal recommendation about this subject?
If we can move up a bit, we can. Or is it?
Yeah, the top
Oh,
one right
okay.
there. So the one that Tabitha had submitted to us previously was to recommend adding clear sampling protocols to be established and adopted to ensure consumer safety amongst a batch. The only way to ensure the sampling being submitted without bias is to have an independent sampler, i.e. from the testing laboratory or third-party sampler. So I'll turn that over to Tabitha to see if that is still the motion she wanted to make.
It is.
Okay, so we'll call for a second.
I second.
Steve Cottrell, second. We've got a hand up. We got Ryan has a question. Ryan, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I mean, I would be supportive, as I mentioned in the first part of that motion, but I really would object to the second part for a lot of reasons. Number one, as Megan mentioned, I don't think the statutory authority allows us to create a third party to do this. I don't believe, and when we, the Dispensary Association, reviewed the topic with a number of labs, they were not prepared to be able to go into all of our cultivation sites, all of our manufacturing sites, to be able to pull samples on the schedule that we're going to need them to. I do think that this would bring the industry to a grinding halt for quite a while. And I will also add that it's not the only way to ensure there's not bias. And frankly, without enforcement of the existing rules, no matter what we pass, there's always an opportunity to game the system. And so I think that establishing or reviewing the existing sampling protocols or establishing additional ones if need be is fine. And then making sure that DHS enforces those sampling protocols is the way to go, rather than adding another layer that's going to gunk up the work, so to speak, and trying to bring this program in an efficient manner.
Okay, Steve, go ahead, please. Steve Cottrell.
Thank you. I was just going to say, in Nevada, it has shown very beneficial. It is also it's shown both sides of ugliness, and it's worked well, and it's also been ugly in certain aspects. Ryan's big concern about somebody coming into your cultivation can be, the samplers in Nevada go to a room where the samples would be picked up by the laboratory already, and all they do is choose the samples that are prepared in front of them. That's one way of doing it. Agreed. It goes either way here. So I just wanted to let him know, there are other aspects, other areas of making it compliant possible.
Okay, great. If there are no more questions or comments, we could move to a vote, because we have a proposed motion on the table and we have a second. So I will go through the names again. We will collect your vote. First, we'll start with Ryan.
No.
Okay. We'll go to Murray Stein.
No.
Okay. We go to Matt LaScala.
I would abstain.
Okay. We'll go to Andrew Provincia.
I vote no.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Tabitha. Tabitha, you proposed, so we know we've got your vote listed. Thank you. We'll go to Joe DeMena.
Yes.
We'll go to Vince Figarelli.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll go to Zhong Hua Xiong.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll go to Maxwell Lung.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll go to Alt Moreno.
I vote yes.
Thank you. And that's everyone. So did you get the tallies there, Megan?
Yes, we had 7 members in favor, 3 opposed, and 1 abstained, so it did pass.
Okay, motion passed. Great. Thank you. We'll move on. And I believe, Tabitha, you're up next also for requirements for reporting field tests to ADHS.
Okay, thank you. I have another slideshow presentation if you want to put that up there for me. Okay, we can go ahead and go to the first slide. Okay, so this is going to be kind of interesting to a lot of you. At least I found it to be. Since we started, and a lot of these proposals that I come up with, it's only because of the history we've had since regulation tests have started. So I'm not really just throwing these things out. There's just things that I'm seeing currently. So right now, there's little oversight as to what's happening when we have a failed test. Basically, where we're just sending now in the beginning, we had a lot of failures across the board with every test that we did pretty much. Now we don't see nearly as much. So the statistics that I came up with, which I didn't present up here, but I have them to talk about, is within my last 6 months of testing. I kind of did some, we have a LIMS system, our own LIMS system that did the statistics for us, so we can tell how many failed tests we had and how many retests that we actually physically had as well. So basically, I would like to suggest some kind of oversight as far as what's happening with the failed test, either implementing a notification email type thing where the labs are required to report at the same time they're reporting the sample to the client or the dispensary or the cultivation, that we report either a simple email system and a form to fill out, which these are the two systems that we've actually researched that people are doing right now. And there's also a software called the metric system, which I'm going to talk about, and that would be something the state would adapt, and it would be a system that everybody has access to go into and really track the batches and the failures going along with the batch. So it's actually a really good system, but it would be a little bit more tedious to get up and going and everybody on that same system, whereas we can fill in and just do a quick email notification system would be the easiest to get it up and going. So like I said, 2 methods of reporting. If we go to the next slide, the most common being that metric system, and the second one being a simple notification system via email. So if you go to the next slide, method of reporting, yeah, those are the two things that we've found that people are using. So of the 37 states that have legalized cannabis, which is on my last slide, but you don't have to flip, Arizona is only one of 7 that does not have some kind of state reporting system. So out of 37, 30 of them actually have something up and going, with the majority of them using the metric system and a couple of them just using the simple email notification type system. So with the metric system, you can go to the next slide. It's basically a tracking system. It's a common, right? It's commonly used. The system not only monitors the test results of each batch and is accessible by the producer, the laboratory, and the regulators, but also tracks cannabis from growth, harvest, processing to testing, shipment, and sale. So it's a really good tracking system that everybody has access to, and that everybody can see what's going on with every batch across the board, and would be available to those bodies only. If we go to the next slide, notification system, super simple, something to do. Basically, it's whenever the lab gets a failed test, the lab has to fill out a form, a quick form, and send a copy of the results along with this form to the regulating body, either before the sample results are released to whoever the client is, if it's a regulatory sample, or at the exact same time. So this would be the easiest thing to implement. Couple reasons why, this is important. Obviously, the labs aren't seeing retest, and we're still seeing multiples of failures. So my statistics, and I just looked in the last 6 months. Let me pull up my hair. I had 270 failed tests in the last 6 months. By far, 151 of them were aspergillus. Then we had 20 of those were metals, 45 of those was some type of pesticide, 16 was residual, specifically butanes, and then a couple E. coli. Across the board, the metals, you had arsenic, cadmium, lead, and very little to none mercury failures. Pesticides, your biggest one by far is bifenthonate and microbutanol. Those two are by far the most, but out of all the pesticides that we currently test, only in the last 6 months, I had 14 different compounds out of that 60 that actually failed. So there's actually 14 of those we had failures, but 45 in the last 6 months. We had a handful of E. coli and 16 residual, I already said that for butanes. So now what I'm seeing in the last, like I said, the majority being aspergillus, 151. When I look back on the retest, maybe 3 to 5 at best that got retested, and half of those were they wanted for potency to be retested, which is not allowable, a retest for potency, but that was what was being requested. So retesting is not happening, at least through my lab, and we've gotten quite a bit of business in the last 6 months to be able to evaluate some really good statistics. So my major concern is what is happening to the samples that are failing, because we're not re-seeing those samples. We're not getting calls on it or questionability with the results. It's kind of like we send the results and we don't hear anything else about it. Now, in the beginning, when we had multiple failures with samples, we would get a lot of bounce back, like, no, I don't have that. I don't have that. I don't have, there's no way you're content, all this stuff. And we would retest initially because we're like, oh gosh, because we just started tested for a lot of these other analytes and compounds. So, and plus they weren't being tested before. So we didn't know what was in them when we started to do 60 pesticides. We're starting to find a lot. So, but I want to give props to the whole industry. It has cleaned up a substantial amount, but we're still seeing, and we got a few retests in the beginning, but really not that much. Out of all the failures we were seeing, I think we got a lot of lab bouncing because consumer or clients they're questionable on the results they were getting. So they would just take the sample to another lab. I'm assuming that's what's happening, because the whole picking up our homogeneous product was not being picked up to go to another lab, and we were getting very minimal requests to do so. And still, so today with the 270 failures, 3 of them maybe got picked up to be retested. And those aren't usually the big players. It's somebody with a simple test. I mean, I had recently just a reporter wanted to pick something back up to have it retested. So those statistics are really just mainly with patients and things wanting their product retested and then wanting to send it to another one to really confirm. So really it's not within the dispensaries and cultivations that I'm getting a retest request. So anyway, so like I said, all of this kind of went hand in hand, and it's what I'm seeing, and I'm pretty positive. I talked to the majority of the lab owners, and I can tell you all of them are seeing the same thing across the board. We are not getting any samples, if any, to be retested. And I can't even imagine the statistics, if that's just in my lab, the 270 failures, what all the other labs are seeing as well. So I wanted to propose that we come up with some kind of notification system so the state can see and track where the failures are, to see what's happening to the product, because we all know the rules. Some of it can be remediated, some of it cannot. It definitely has to go to another lab to be retested, but the rule is that the same homogenized sample at lab A has to go to lab B. And it's just not happening. We're not seeing it. And I think I have enough statistics and enough work in the last 2 years to prove I could show the state what we're seeing, and everything is logged and documented very well within my laboratory. So anyway, so I propose we adopt one of these 2 ways of reporting any kind of failures moving forward. And that's about it.
This is Murray Stein, if I could just jump in. A couple questions, Tabitha, that I'm hoping you have some insight in, or somebody here. The metric software, is that independent of the inventory management system that's required, or is that an integrated component? Do you know?
I think it's an independent system. It's not used for the same type of system you guys do. I'm not really that familiar because we don't have that. I don't work in that system, but I'm almost positive it's just a tracking to track the test results and what's going on with the actual batches. I could find out more information on it. I really didn't think the state would want it because it might be costly to do. That's why I really suggested the simple email system that seems, and it's really easy for us to do it. I mean, 270 failures in 6 months. I mean, I send out 50 emails a day. I think anybody in the laboratory can get these out along with results each time. I mean, it could be streamlined super fast, simple form, and upload it to an email for the state to be trackable. I mean, it's super simple.
One question about that, though, we're mostly in the infused products area, not dealing with flour and concentrate and things like that. When we send something to you and it fails, it's inevitably something like we fell below or above potency targets. We send it off then to 2 other labs, and if we get 2 passes, we're good to go. You'll never hear about that. I mean, because we just went to 2 labs, and in some cases we might get 2 thumbs up and that product out the door. So is that an issue?
But that's not the way it's supposed to be done. The sample that we have in-house, that we homogenized ourselves and we put away for, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, we hold on to it so you guys have time to review your results. That same sample is you're supposed to call the other laboratory and it needs to be picked up from us, the same apples to apples product, already homogenized and took
Yep.
to the other lab for retesting.
That is what
But
we
we
do.
would still, we still report the failure, but it would be the state. I would think someone at the state to follow up the batch to make sure it was done properly once they got the failure notification.
Right. My only point was that you wouldn't necessarily hear from us aside from please provide that same sample to these other parties. So
Correct. Yeah. And because I don't check on results to see if you got a passing or failing after, you know, I'm pretty confident in the results we have. So, I mean, I wouldn't do, unless a client wants to call and say, I got it, you know, it didn't have anything in it. You know, at that point, you send it to a third lab. And I really don't know what happens at that point, but it's been so minimal, right? Like 3 to be able to follow up on and have our potency. So,
I can tell you what happens when it fails. We lock the person responsible in the walk-in freezer for 20 minutes and it doesn't happen again.
well,
Just kidding.
I'm
Just for the
still seeing
record, I'm kidding.
I'm still seeing, I know, I'm still seeing 270 failures, you know, and no retests. So that's quite a bit of, you know, not knowing what happens to that sample. If it's getting just another sample being took to another lab, surely they're just not taking and getting rid of the product without a retest. I mean, we're not naive to that. There just really needs to be some accountability what to do with these failed tests. I mean, because the state does not see them at all. When, you know, they audit our data, yes, but they're not looking to audit you guys' samples. You know, they audit our procedures and what we have to have in place as far as analyzing and reporting. But they're not seeing a failed test when they look through my results and saying, what client is this linked to? And I'm going to find out they're not doing that because the people that audit us are not the same people that, I mean, the same body, but they're not the same group of people. So there really is just no accountability there on what's going on with some of these failed tests that we're seeing.
Okay, we'll go to Zhonghua Zhang. You have a question?
Yes, I do. So for there's two options. One is the data matrix, and the other one is the email. So even with the email reporting, the state, the DHA still would need to have a database where all those information would be stored. And also, would this information be open to public?
I would imagine that, you know, they would pass it on to the auditors that audit the dispensaries and the cultivations. I mean, the state, who I would send the results to would be the laboratory auditing group. And from then they can choose to pass it, or I'm sure they would choose to pass it on to the people that audit the actual dispensaries, which is a whole different group of people. So it would be up to them to, you know, maybe a simple Excel spreadsheet with the client's names. And so when they do go out and audit every 6 months, they can say, hey, I've got these failures. When they're, you know, they prepare themselves before they hit a facility, they'd have their failures there and say, let's talk about these batches and what went on, like where are they at now? Some accountability, but I mean, with just 270, it seems like a lot. It is a lot, but within 6 months, you know, and it's the main, I mean, every lab has a group of clients that usually they maintain typically. I mean, it's the same offenders every time we see the same ones that have the same failures for this usually are the ones we see that same compound again. Like I said, it might be a different pesticide all the time from the same, might be 1 in 20 that they submitted, but it's there. It might be aspergillus, 2 at a time, but we're always seeing it there. So I don't think it would be a heck of a lot of work for anybody to go and follow up on this once the information's been passed along. Or, you know, now the state has something for reference. If they do get somebody that calls and says, hey, I tested my product, a patient, and this is the batch number, then they can likely look up that batch number to see if there was a failure, if they got anything reported on it. And it would just make their lives a lot easier to be able to look it up and say, I have not received a failed test result for this batch, you know?
Yeah.
So this is Megan from the state. Just to add, he had asked a question about public records, and of course, anything submitted to the state is subject to public records. We do have some confidentiality in the medical marijuana program, but in general, yes, everything is subject to public records once it comes into the state.
Okay, well, thank you. That sounds like a pretty good plan.
Okay, and we'll go to Steve Cottrell next. Could you ask your question, please?
Yeah, thanks. I personally have worked with the metric system for many years in Oregon and Colorado, and it's a very robust, very neat system. I feel that I don't think this committee could, I mean, this is a big legislative movement to make something like metric drop into place. So I would think that we would have to do some type of an email notification. This is I mean, the metric system is an incredibly robust system. It's great to have it on the record for something to look as we proceed further on down the road here, but it's a gigantic system. Also, one other concern that I would be having is, as a manufacturer of products, if I bring a product to the testing lab and it's not a final product, a final for sale product, and I fail on some product, something, say, let's just say mold, does that get reported out? I'm just simply doing testing on certain things here. I'm not giving a final product ready for retail sale. I think that would mean we would need a lot of clarity there also, because I would want to make sure that, hey, something accidentally didn't get put out there. Oh, hey, this ABC company is having pesticides popping or mold popping, when it was just a test. I was testing somebody's oil or testing somebody's flour.
I'm only talking about regulated COAs. We get a lot of R&D with just potency and things, but we don't put that on a regulated COA for sale type product. We do that on our normal old reports pretty much, but our regulated COA, that's actually flour that has everything on it, you know, or a concentrate that has every test on it that you're supposed to be done at one time. That I'm talking about, then we know it's a regulated sample. I mean, that's a good indicator to us, but we at our lab, we always ask, make sure they want full panel regulated so they can sell. So I would only say report regulated stuff, because we know there's R&D out there.
This is Megan with the state again. I just wanted to point out that Steve was correct, that it would bring up some other things that we would have to work through if a recommendation was made about a specific software. First of all, we'd have to look at statutory authority. And then if that was something that would ever be implemented, we also have to follow the state procurement code. So thank you, Steve, for pointing that out. You're absolutely correct.
Well, the email notification system, I would think, would be just sufficient to get us started and see if it works for the program, you know.
Okay, did we have any more questions for Tabitha? Okay, hearing none, I think we'll go back to the motion.
Yep. So the motion that Tabitha had sent ahead of time was worded this way, sorry. The advisory council recommends all testing laboratories report any failing test result for a mandated test to ADHS. Tabitha, is that a motion you would like to formally make during this meeting?
It is, yes.
I
Okay,
second.
do we have? Second is Steve Cottrell, is that correct?
That is correct.
I'd like to comment.
Okay,
I'd like to comment real quick.
okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Andrew.
I heard earlier that R&D testing was separate from a different type of testing, which is, you know, the actual product testing. And then I believe the motion says all testing. So am I mistaken there?
The motion says all testing laboratories report any failing test result for a mandated test to ADHS.
Thank you.
That effectively excludes R&D.
Okay, Jean-Gua, you have a question?
I just wonder if we should add some language about a follow-up, for the failed test. So we just report it and do not make any recommendation about the follow-up.
So we do have the motion and the second on the table. So I think what we would need to do is go ahead and do our roll call vote for this. And then if anyone had another recommendation they would like to make related to it, we could do another recommendation as well.
Okay, we'll go ahead and take our vote. I'll go Ryan Hurley.
I will vote yay.
Thank you. Murray Stein,
Yes.
thank you. Matt LaScala,
I vote yes.
thank you. Andrew,
I vote no.
okay, thank you. Joe Domena,
Yes.
thank you. Vince Figarelli,
Yes.
thank you. Zhonghua Shang,
Yes.
thank you. Maxwell Lung,
Yes.
Alvin Marino,
I vote yes.
thank you. I think that's everyone. What's the tally, Megan?
We had 10 in favor and 1 opposed, so it does pass.
So motion passes. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I think we're going to go back. I missed a couple of, you had put some motions forward and sent them into us, Tabitha. And some of them were like regarding definitions of microclimate, concentrate batch size, etc. Do we want to go back to those at this point, Tabitha?
Sorry, I'm reading the screen, which ones they were.
That's okay. I think Marianne's got them up there.
Yeah, I'm just now reading them again because that was a while ago.
Okay, I think it's the second one down there on microclimate was the first one.
Yeah, yes, because I think there needs to be a better definition that explains what it exactly is.
Given the previous one that we passed, I don't know that it has the microclimate in that previous definition of batch. And I would be opposed to adding this definition, which is pretty vague and unclear. And I mean, the difference between the bottom side of my desk and the top side of my desk definitely are different, but I don't know by how much.
Well, basically, I mean, it's just not defined like one room from another, and one person might consider both rooms are the same and consider those the same batch number in each room. So I just think it needs to be narrowed down a little bit to define the same space, at least a more defined definition of what the climate is within that batch, because right now it can be entire building someone could deem as being the same conditions.
Just wanted to mention, we just saw that there's some items being entered in the chat. It does not appear there from our council members. So it's not a big deal at this time because it's not something that has to be part of our open meeting record, but please do not enter anything in the chat unless you have technical difficulties.
Okay, sorry, we have a question from Zhonghua Shang. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I think Tabitha addressed this a little bit of the background. What is the purpose of defining microclimate? Is this going to be used to define a batch?
Well, again, it's kind of hard. We're going back to this conversation right now because it was really in the initial couple months ago when we talked about defining a batch. And within making a simple definition of a batch, there were certain terms in there or words used that I thought needed further definition, so it can't be misconstrued as being something else. Like instead of saying within a certain time frame, we need to put in what's the time frame, 72 hours. When we say in the same microclimate, or we need to say what kind of condition is a microclimate, things like that. So these were just things that I thought, like, if we got a clear definition, a better defined definition for batch, that we can also in the definition section of the rules add what these exactly are, because right now, currently, these words can be misconstrued to be a numerous thing. Same time frame. What's the time frame? 2 week, 3 week, 4 week within the same month? What's the same microclimate? Oh, it's in the same building. The building next to us, we do the same thing. They can say it's that building too. There just need to be a more narrowed down in within a good definition, and then have some more definitions that go with these big terms that can be easily misconstrued. Because I've heard through, you know, the last 2 years when people define their batch and they say this, well, it's the same conditions that we combine these 2-3 rooms, or this time frame, you know, they combine it within, oh, they harvest it within a full week and it's all same batch. I just thought there needed to be some narrowing down to make sure that we got a really what a defined batch should be and look like, and it would be the same for everybody. You really couldn't use the terminology and just kind of make up your own microclimate. It could be these rooms. We got to really narrow that down to make sure that it's more defined for us.
But this definition you are adding here is still very vague.
Again, it's just a proposal that, you know, because right now there's nothing that says anything about what a microclimate is. Any set of atmospheric conditions that differ from the climate surrounding it is what the actual microclimate is. But how do we define, you know, if we're using that in the rules, how do we know what that is? These weren't necessarily like proposals I was making so much as it was just talking about when we define a batch, we've got to be careful and wary of some of these bigger words that can be often misconstrued and have been, as far as what everybody actually is pulling to say is a batch. So these were just kind of a tag along thing of things that I thought we should further define when we're talking about giving the batch a better definition. So it is kind of weird going back to it now and re-explaining all of this stuff, but that's what this was for.
And Tabitha, if you don't want to make any of those recommendations at this time, that's totally fine. These are just what had come into this. So we wanted to make sure that if you wanted to formally make any of those recommendations today for a vote, that you had the opportunity.
You know, I'm unsure, because I think that within the first meeting we had another one that they proposed to define a batch. I think one got approved. So with going through and now going back to here, I mean, if these words aren't used currently in our definition or our proposed definition, then it really makes no sense to define them if we're not going to be using these terms. But if they are being used anywhere in our rules, I just think it needs to be narrowed down, that we include these things. And I don't remember what you know what I mean? Yeah, so it kind of just went hand in hand.
We can put that other recommendation up. I can read it to you right now. It was specifically about cultivated marijuana. So it was the recommendation that did get approved in the September meeting was to amend the definition of batch in the rules to include the following language. When referring to cultivated medical marijuana, a specific amount of a particular lot of medical marijuana that is uniform in strain, grown from one or more seeds or cuttings that are planted, cultivated, utilizing the same pesticides and other agricultural chemicals, and harvested at the same time.
Okay, well, within that, we still didn't come up with how many pounds or whatever. We never came up with that. And then again, we have harvested at the same time, but what is harvested at the same time? Obviously, you can't get it all done within 24 hours in most cases. So that, again, that was some of the terminology that went on when I would talk about when I proposed the definition I did, my extra wording came as definitions for my proposed definition, which I'm really not, we didn't, I guess, push that one through.
That motion fell under, that was not approved.
Right. And so, yeah, so that's where these extra, like I used some of this terminology within my proposed definition. And so with keeping it not so wordy, I just thought that these additional references when someone goes through what's the same time frame, what's the same microclimate, could be included. But if we're not using any of the wording that I suggested for it than I still think that the same time period needs to be, I propose that a time period be specific and not just same time period within the definition. I think that's important, but it doesn't appear that microclimate was included on it. So, but it did say something about the same chemicals and all of those things, you know, everything that was done the exact same way. So, but it didn't really say what space. Our definition didn't say about the same space. It just same conditions using the same chemicals and things, pretty much grown the same way. But
It seems
yes.
likely that it's probably something that maybe we revisit again after the January report and seeing where the rules go when we have the final rules that are open right now and see where we are from that. Does that sound
Right.
fair and come back to this?
Right, yeah, because at this point, these were just proposed ones for you guys to work with. So there's no telling what the final draft's gonna look like now. So this would just be another discussion altogether once y'all have the final draft done.
Perfect. We will hold on to those though, just so that we have the record. But no need to vote on that today then.
Okay, great.
Megan, this is Murray Stein. If I could just offer something, I understand Tabitha's pain point. I think what I'd like to hear from maybe next time is from some of the cultivator participants here as to the validity of worrying about microclimate if it's too specific. You know, I'm not as knowledgeable about cultivation as some, but my understanding is frequently what they look for is the common set of approaches in terms of how they grow their various strains, and they don't tend to waver from that once they find the specific conditions that work well. So I understand the argument for microclimate because that's the room it's grown in, that's where the problems are going to occur. But if there's two rooms of the same type, is that really an issue or not? And I want to hear the pain points from, you know, people like Cottrell and Ryan Hurley and folks like that may be able to speak to that.
And again, I think that's something we can definitely put on a future agenda, Murray. And if everyone in the council has people that would like to present and speak to that, that would be after that January report to bring in new business.
And Matt Lascala could really speak to it as well. He's in the cultivation every day, more so than anybody on this call. So Matt would be definitely the expert in this matter.
Okay, we'll give them a few months to prepare.
Okay, well, I think we're finished there, so we will move on. I believe our next item is a presentation and discussion of dispensary establishment deficiencies.
Yes, and this is Megan, but I'm actually going to turn this over to Mariana and Daryl because they are our resident experts in this area. So they'll be able to speak to the numbers they have for you. At one of our previous meetings, the council had asked that we give a little more context to this. The report is based in statute. We have to have it de-identified the way we do as far as numbers go, but Mariana and Daryl have pulled together the top 10, I think it's top 10. It's the top testing deficiencies that have been cited against dispensaries and establishments. So I think that's what they're going to share with you today.
So we have this broken up by the top 5 deficiencies for Chapter 17 Medical Marijuana Program, and then the top 5 deficiencies from the Chapter 18 Adult Use Marijuana Program. So the top deficiency that we see is the method for documenting the chain of custody for a sample is one of the top deficiencies that we see for testing. The next one is that the methods to deter tampering with the sample and determine whether tampering has occurred, those policies and procedures need to be updated a little more on the dispensary side. Again, actually, all of these are going to be policies and procedures. So developing, documenting, and implementing, and that's the key part. If you developed and documented the policies and procedure, you want to make sure that you're actually implementing these policies and procedures. So the third one is going to be the process for submitting a sample to a medical marijuana or marijuana product to a laboratory agent or laboratory for testing. The fourth one is the process for requesting retesting of a remaining portion of a sample for medical marijuana or medical marijuana product. So that was one of the concerns that Tabitha was addressing earlier. And the fifth one for medical marijuana is the process by which each of the medical marijuana or marijuana products is remediated, including the methods for remediation and the subsequent retesting. So the next 5 are going to be for our adult use program. For these, you're going to see the very top one is going to be before offering a batch for marijuana for sale, you're going to get that product tested according to table 3.1. The next one is going to be to ensure that the product is labeled with the potency of the medical marijuana or marijuana product based on the results of the testing for the facility, specifically related to the total cannabinoid reported for that. The next one is going to be allowing a medical facility agent associated with the marijuana testing facility to access marijuana or marijuana product to collect those samples. Again, that's going to be a policies and procedures one. The next one's also policies and procedures, providing samples of marijuana and marijuana products to marijuana testing facility for testing. Again, you want to make sure that you're developing, documenting and implementing those policies. And the final one for adult use is simply ensuring that the product at the retail site is labeled with the total THC, again, according to the C of A's that we receive.
And just for everyone, that all that information is posted on the advisory council website. It was posted ahead of this meeting today, so that is all available to you. And then if there are no questions on that, we'll actually turn it over to Steve Baker and Mary Cornell with the lab side too.
Steve, did you want me to go over these?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. So if you could pull up, there we go. So these are the 5 most common deficiencies the lab team finds when we do laboratory inspections. So the first one there is a requirement that the data produced at the laboratories are of known and acceptable precision and accuracy and are scientifically valid and defensible. The second one has to do with the laboratory's policies and procedures. It's a requirement that the testing complies with a complete and current standard operating procedure that is in compliance with our rules as well as the AOAC validated method where applicable. The third one is requirements for instruments and common laboratory equipment. The AOAC guidelines has a table in Appendix A with a variety of different requirements for common equipment like thermometers and pipetters. So we make sure that the labs are in compliance with those requirements. The fourth one covers a variety of inventory control. It's kind of a long section, so I shortened it there. But you can go to our rules section 404 or 5 CI to see the complete requirements there. And then lastly is requirements regarding proficiency testing that's required. The labs are required to do a proficiency test for each parameter each in a 12-month period. And that's all we have for the labs.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mary. Any questions for Mary? Okay, hearing none. Let's see.
So we will be scheduling the final meeting for the year in December, like we did last year. We will try to get a draft of the report out to all of you at least a week or 2 ahead of that. And then during the meeting, if those of you who were around last year remember, we actually were able to make the recommendation that the council would allow the department to update the numbers as far as the deficiencies on the lab and dispensary side through the end of the year so we could get complete data on that. So we will be following that same process again. And then I'll turn it back to you because it looks like we do have a hand raised.
Okay, Maxwell, do you have a question or comment? Please?
Hi, I guess a question. So I wonder if there will be an in-person meeting option, in the upcoming meetings. I remember at some point we were discussing, the council meeting, we can meet, at least some of us, we can meet in person. We actually have never meet in person since the council. I have never met in person since the council started. So I was just wondering if it's still, an option there.
I think we can absolutely consider that for next year as we roll into it. Last year we were kind of restricted to doing the virtual with different guidance that was in place, but we can definitely look into that as we start our meetings in 2023, Max.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and so just a reminder that if there are any items that you'd like discussed in the next meeting, please forward them to us and we'll get them on the agenda. As Megan mentioned, the next meeting will be December, so we will get that information out to you as soon as possible so you can get it on your calendars. And again, thank you for joining us today. I think it was a very good meeting. We got several motions approved and passed, so thank you again for that. And thank you again for joining today and look forward to talking to you at the next meeting. Have a good afternoon.